I solemnly swear that I am up to no good.
Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast. I'm Chris Garner, joined with my co-host George Aldridge, and today we are at the halfway point in our Harry Potter marathon. We are going to give our review on Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the 2005 movie, directed by Mike Newell, who had directed such films before this as Four Weddings and a Funeral, Donnie Brasco, and would later, 5 years after this, go on to direct such cinematic classics as Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time. But we are not talking about that movie, we are talking about Goblet of Fire. Alfonso Cuarón bowed out because he didn't want to jump on for director. Immediately a year after that, we're sort of going back to the split that came out with Philosopher's Stone and Chamber of Secrets with this one. And actually, we've both said before this, we don't know how much we are going to be able to talk about this movie because I think sort of our memories on it, we always start off with memories on the previous ones. Our memories are kind of hazy on this one, so I'm going to let you start off on this one, George, because you know, I want to hear your thoughts on this one a bit more, I think.
Yeah, so this was the first Harry Potter film I did not see at the cinema.
Okay.
I remember it distinctly, watching Children in Need and seeing Harry Potter adverts for ages, and I wasn't allowed to go. No idea why. Still don't know why. And then I got the DVD when it came out, so I saw it for the first time. I'd read the book at this point, so I knew what would have come. But I was just shocked I never saw it at the cinema. Didn't have any merchandise. Nothing like the first three films. And it's just a very odd one. I'm not quite sure why I didn't see it, but no one in my family did. But yeah,
it's a strange one, isn't it? Because I mean, I was saying last time with Azkaban, you didn't see Chamber of Secrets at the cinema. I did. You went to see Azkaban. I didn't. You didn't see this one.
I did see Chamber of Secrets at the cinema. I just didn't remember seeing it at the cinema.
Oh, okay.
Whereas before, I can remember like every time I've seen a film, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just couldn't remember seeing it at the cinema, but we did.
Well, this one I did go to the cinema to see it, but it was around this time. I was reading the books before the movies came out. I did that with Goblet of Fire, and but it was around this time where I was really feeling the tedium with Harry Potter. I was moving on to other franchises such as Lord of the Rings. I was really mad into that franchise, and that kind of took my focus, and I went away from Harry Potter. This was kind of the start of that, I would say. Maybe around 3. Definitely into this one, I was losing interest in it rapidly, but I did go and see the movie. At the time, I didn't like the book at all. I thought it was really overly long, and I am going through the books again now, so I guess I'm going to have a different outlook on the books completely. But even the movie as well, like I went to see it and I really just didn't care at all anymore, and I just couldn't get invested into anything. So at the time, I really, really disliked the movie. It wasn't until a couple of years ago when I rewatched the movie where I actually really enjoyed it, and then for these reviews I have been watching a Harry Potter film every day. I finished it today with Deathly Hallows Part 2. And I do like this movie. I do. I don't think I like it as much as the previous ones, even including Azkaban, I think. I think Azkaban flows a lot better as a movie, and in fact I think the biggest thing I have against this film, while it's not a bad film on its own, it definitely feels very fragmented and very clunky, especially like the first half hour or so. It feels very, we're here now we're in this different place, whereas in the book I think there's a lot more, and I'm sure you're going to go into all the book stuff. We were joking before this where, you know, you've been reading the books recently, you kind of know everything that happened. There's a lot more at the start of the book that they didn't put into the film, which I think makes the film sort of a very, very slow pace at the start.
Yeah, so I'm going to say the dreaded phrase. In the books.
Okay, I'm going to do a count on this. That's the first time you've said it.
Please, because I absolutely despise it, and there's nothing else to say instead of it. It's the first long one. It's twice the size of Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yeah.
And this was the first time where they discussed cutting the film into 2 parts, which was a very sensible discussion to have, an even more sensible decision to not do it for the 4th one. Obviously, we'll get to when we cover the Deathly Hallows films. So there was a lot of subplots changing, merging, of editing on scripts. And you can see how much harder it is for the screenwriter, because Steve Kloves did do the first 3, and then he did 6, 7, and the 2 Deathly Hallows. He didn't do not Azkaban, he didn't do Order of the Phoenix. So he struggled with this. And you would do if you're trying to compose a 600-page book into a 120-page screenplay, you could say. It's insane. You've got to do subplots, you've got to rewrite stuff to make sense if you cut scenes out. So I can understand how hard it is, but you're certainly right when it's clunkier, because 1 minute you feel like you're getting into something and then it just disappears. And I think the shining example of that is the Quidditch World Cup.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember seeing this film, and usually with editing, this was even before I was really into editing when I saw this movie at the cinema. I never really picked up on all those things. I never really looked into films that in depth to that level of how they're constructed and how they're structured and put onto the big screen. I noticed it with this movie, and a good editor for a good editor in general is something you don't really notice. You just kind of watch the film, and if you don't notice any particular edit, then chances are they've done a very good job because it didn't detract from the movie. I noticed it with this movie, and you're absolutely right. The Quidditch World Cup, one of the main things I remember from the book, and one of the things that I absolutely loved, and I mean, come on, who doesn't love Quidditch? I mean, every time it's on screen, it's fantastic to watch. Even though we didn't get much of it in Azkaban, it was still there, and it was still great, the bit that we got of it. And it's just so key to the Harry Potter franchise. And the fact that they build up to it, you get this big event, we haven't seen it, it's a new setting, the Quidditch World Cup, it's this massive event. We're seeing all the build up for it before, we're seeing how excited everyone is, you're excited, it's getting you excited, the viewer. The players come out, it's great spectacle, Cornelius Fudge announces it, and we cut to straight afterwards. And I remember even being in the cinema, I was really confused. I was like, wait, have they cut it out? Is it gone? Are we going to see any Quidditch? It's so random to the point where if they knew they weren't going to do it, and I think actually, I mean, you can talk about it more in a minute, I think they did actually film some bits for it, but if they knew they weren't going to have it in the movie, just cut out all the setup for it, because it just feels really, really awkward. Just start it immediately after, like they can be referring to Quidditch, and start it off where the Death Eaters rock up.
Yeah, and I think the Death Eater stuff doesn't even make sense, since it's such a random attack.
Yeah, it is. I mean, this is the first setup for him, isn't it?
And you've never seen them before. You know that Lucius is there, as glorious as he is. They just kind of attack out of nowhere, and you don't really know why. They're just setting things on fire for no reason. I think in the opening scene, Voldemort makes a line as baby Voldemort, saying like, "Round up the old pals." It's kind of irrelevant. I think that the build-up scene's even more upsetting because it's such a great build-up of the islands, the Bulgaria stuff, the stadium. It looks absolutely wonderful. And then it disappears, and I get they've got to introduce Victor Crumb, which we'll talk about later on, which is probably the only reason they left that setup in. But the stories are that they filmed, I don't know how much they filmed or whether it was people on a green screen, but there are, quote, Quidditch scenes filmed which they didn't put into the cut due to time. And I can understand that, but it was just, this is one of the biggest franchises in the world. There's nothing wrong with it going 10-15 minutes over. Chamber of Secrets was 2 hours 40, and that's the shortest book. That's the answer to everything. People didn't get fatigued watching it for the first time. It fitted well, and especially when the books get chunkier, you do need more of that time, which unfortunately they didn't want to give out. And it does pay a price for it, because you miss out on some great scenes, but then you miss out on stuff that could further the plot and further the experience. Because you haven't seen Quidditch in a good few years, and you don't see it for a few years after this.
Yeah, and actually, I know we're going to get onto favourite scenes later on, but the moment the players do come onto the pitch is one of my favourite moments in the film. It's the Bulgarian team, the drums kick in, which is kind of their theme song throughout the movie, which is one of my favourite songs on the soundtrack. And Crumb does this epic stunt where he kind of does like a handstand on the broom. And it's so awesome to watch, and that's what gets you really geared up for it. And you're right with the whole Death Eaters thing, how, yeah, you do kind of get that setup in the opening with Voldemort, but it's you can't really make out what they're saying, and that's the point of it. Like, you're following it from the perspective of that old guy, who I think you said is the gardener to the Riddle family in the book. And even he's just like making out little bits of what they're saying. You can't really hear it clearly, so I think it's very easy to miss that setup line. So I think if you are going into this as a casual viewer, like you haven't read the book or you don't know about the book, it does kind of leave you in a weird state, and maybe that's what they were going for. Like, you're kind of immediately thrown into it, into that chaos where everyone's trying to escape. But to me, you do need, I think it would have benefited with more of a setup. Even the stuff with like the Dark Mark, I think that's, Voldemort says it very, very briefly at the start, where he's like, send a sign or a signal to everyone. But even then, you are kind of left like, I don't really know what's going on. And watching this film again, I only really started getting into this movie again when they get to Hogwarts and we start the Triwizard stuff.
Yeah, and with the Triwizard stuff, some of that's so rushed as well in story, and it doesn't flow right, and you jump in here and there, and it's coming back to haunt you. So I think you're right with the editing, because I never noticed when I was younger, but it does get very rough, especially when they kind of jump through the actual 3 tasks themselves. They cut a lot out, and I understand that again, but a few minutes here and there can't do any wrong. But I just think it was probably the shock of adapting that 600 page into a shorter thing.
Into like a 2.5-hour movie.
Yeah, and they only discuss 2 parts. They can't sit there and say, well, we wanted to do it in 2 parts, because they know it wasn't on, and I've got a lot of respect for them for not doing it, because the productions would be horrific for the future films if everyone was 2 parts.
Well, it was actually Alfonso Cuarón, the director of Prisoner of Azkaban, that suggested doing it into 1 movie, I think, wasn't it? Which, fair play to him, and even watching this, it doesn't need to be 2 movies. It really, really doesn't. I don't think there is enough plot there to justify it being 2 movies. And we said before as well that if it was 2 movies, the cut-off point in the first one would have been a very awkward cliffhanger, and I don't think it would have worked. I don't think it would have brought people back, like, rush into their seats to see the second part of it. I think the film could have literally benefited with about 15 minutes extra, 10 or 15 minutes extra. And I even watched this version with the deleted scenes in it. I kind of edited it together myself and put them in. And even with those, I never felt the length of it. I was just kind of in the moment with it. And when you're wrapped up in that world, I think if it's going to benefit the story, if it's going to make it flow better, then do it, But I guess it's Warner Brothers. They didn't want to take it to 3 hours, but I do think they could have benefited with like 10 or 15 minutes more. I guess we could talk about the new director a bit, though, if you like, because, as I said, Alfonso Cuarón, I think he would have come back, in all honesty, to direct it if it hadn't have been filmed immediately straight after Azkaban, kind of like the Chris Columbus thing, how he came back for it. They asked him to come back for the 3rd one, but he was like, look, I can't do this after I've been on this project for like 2.5 years or whatever it was. It would have been nice to have seen Cuarón come back, even though regarding my thoughts on Prisoner of Azkaban, it would have been nice to have seen him continue that with the cast themselves into the 4th movie. But he even said that he wanted to just devote all his time to Azkaban, and if he had have took on this as well, I think he would have had to start production on this even as he was still working on Azkaban. So I can understand, and fair play to him for sticking with the film that he was working on. I don't know whether I like the direction in this, and that's not to say that Goblet of Fire is a bad film. I'm not saying that at all. I enjoyed it thoroughly when I watched it, but something feels slightly off, and I'm not sure what it is about it, and I'm not sure if it's down to the direction.
Yeah, and with the Alfonso Cuarón stuff, I suppose, because of Children of Men, he seemed very desperate to shoot that. And
yeah, he even postponed that, didn't he, to do Azkaban?
Exactly, and I don't think he'd ever let it postpone another year or 2. And you're right with the direction, because Mike Newell came on, and at this point, Chris Columbus, they clearly wanted to do all 7. That's a well-known fact.
Yeah.
Cuarón, they probably knew they'd get him once, but they're looking for a director to do all of them. Mike Newell comes on board, does 1 film, disappears. The next director does the rest of them, plus Fantastic Beasts. Which means that they were looking long-term, and things, we don't know the politics of it, but you're right when you say something feels off. And I know it's petty and it's down to costume, but the one standout is every single character, from Harry to Ron to the Weasley twins, have all got long hair out of nowhere that doesn't come back. Whereas in the 3rd film, they said, we just come in with our hair the way it would be every day. And then this is clearly very strict. And I think Mike Newell, he's a traditional director, I think is the right way of saying it. They've got a lot of respect for him, and he treated them very, very differently to Chris Columbus and Alfonso Cuarón. More famously, when he broke one of his ribs half fighting one of the Weasley twins, trying to improve their performance, which I understand is, he did try and improve it, but being on top of them and actually hitting him, that probably means they just wanted to punch him, which improved their performance. Yeah. But there is something not right with the direction in this. It's just so, it's not obvious, but in comparison to the other films, it feels so isolated. I think that's the right word for it.
Yeah, it does. And we talked about with 3 how it it helped with that transition. I sort of argued that it wasn't an effective transition as most people see it, but it definitely was that move to a more darker theme. But it's not quite the tone that we get from Order of the Phoenix onwards with David Yates taking over, and it is that awkward in-between movie, I think. That direction style is weird. Like, I mean, you told me about that, didn't you, with fighting the Weasley twins? There's a difference between being a hands-on director and picking a fight with one of your cast members to try and make them fight better. Like, I think that was probably a step too far. And I don't know, I mean, you've seen the behind-the-scenes stuff, I don't know if the cast really did like this director. They're clearly not going to say that they hated him or anything in interviews, but I don't know whether you get that sense of that isolation, that distance that you're talking about when you see the cast with the director in there. I don't know, but I mean, we're talking about that something feels off. In terms of critical response, it's got an 88%. It's actually one of the highest. It's one of the best, most popular reviewed and rated Harry Potter films out the franchise. Got universal acclaim when it came out. Loads of people loved it. I think it's also in the list of highest grossing films of all time. I think now it's like 34 or something, but I think when it came out, it was really high up. Yeah, when it came out, it was the 8th highest grossing film of all time. But I guess that's just down to the name Harry Potter Every Comes Back for it. But in terms of the hair thing, I never really thought much about it until you kind of brought it up. And I guess it is the easiest way to show that dark change to the characters, how you want them to be more distressed and bedraggled. And I compared him to sort of Anakin Skywalker from Revenge of the Sith. How they give him the ragged hair and the sort of like the scar on his face and the beat up look, to show that dark change into him, and it's just so easy to do. Like, you just look at him and you go, this is a bad egg from the start. And I don't know if they were trying to do that with Harry Potter, especially because this is the first time we get a proper Voldemort in, and they wanted that sort of like comparison where they keep saying that Voldemort is a part of you, you're very much the same person. They were trying to show that in his outward appearance. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that, because if it had just been Harry that's hair had gone long, then I'd see it as similar to Anakin, but because everyone from even Neville has long hair.
Yeah.
Just because everyone has it, it just feels like they've all been told to come in with long hair, and it makes it look more like a joke. Like, I get people go through patches of haircuts, but not everyone in the same year has the same haircut for 1 year. You need to differentiate it a bit. With Mike Nall, I think you see the behind the scenes stuff, and they're saying nice things about him because they're nice people. We don't know the politics. He might have been the nicest guy around, but from the clips they show, there's something off about it. He's shouting at them via microphones, loudspeakers, whereas on the other behind-the-scenes clips, Chris Columbus is talking to them face-to-face, ear-to-ear.
Yeah.
And it's just a very different style of directing. I don't think as kids they were used to either. But there is something different about this, and I don't know. I would have liked to have seen what David Yates did for it. I mean, we'll talk more about that in the Order of the Phoenix ones, but they obviously looked for their long-term director and didn't get it this time round. I mean, there are some good bits, don't get me wrong. He does bring the traditional sort of English vibe to it, the way some of the comedy is, particularly on the sort of romancy stuff with the Yule Ball. I think he nails that aspect, but in terms of action set pieces, you can tell he's in unknown territory here.
Yeah, and again, not to say the action's bad, because when we get onto it with the Triwizard Tournament, which I guess we can move on to now if you like, talk more about that sort of the schools and the things themselves. The action is quite impressive with the dragon segment, especially. The other two, not so much, but I think even in terms of the book, those aren't as interesting as attacking a dragon. I do remember the whole mermaid sequence, though, in the moat being a lot more effective in the book, the way that J.K. Rowling describes. I think she's talking about when Harry's trying to like claw his way back to the surface, when he's like drowning, and it's like that rush for oxygen, like he's trying to get back. I really remember reading that and feeling like I was underwater myself. Really short sentences increasing the urgency of that. But I guess I'll just go through the plot now for anyone who doesn't know. I mean, we're 20 minutes into a Harry Potter Goblet of Fire review, which is weird if you've never even seen it or even heard of it. But Harry finds himself mysteriously selected as an underage competitor in a dangerous tournament between 3 schools of magic. On the surface, like, this is where I'm trying to decide whether I like this one better than Order of the Phoenix. I think in terms of content of what actually happens in Goblet of Fire, I prefer it to Order of the Phoenix, but I think that David Yates and what he did for that movie and the flow of it feels a lot more cohesive than this one, so I'd probably give the edge to Order of the Phoenix. I do love the concept of the Triwizard Tournament, though. However, I do question sort of like Hogwarts' health and safety policy with this. During the second task of this, they are openly willing to let students die. like just to let them drown. I don't know if there's some kind of charm on them where if they don't rescue them in the correct time limit, then they're going to come back to the surface and they'll be fine. It seems like the most barbaric event in the history of wizarding communities in this, and Dumbledore and everyone's just okay with it.
So with the Triwizard Tournament, there's a bit of history that hasn't been done in about 100 years. People always die. It was this inter-school tournament, and it was a massive deal, and it wasn't done for 100 odd years. They didn't do it. They brought it back. They made it a Triwizard Tournament. They changed the rules to be over 17, I think, which is the wizarding age. It's their version of 16/18. So there's that dynamic, and I don't think they let people die, but it is barbaric, and I think it's the most action-orientated Harry Potter films in terms of plot.
Yeah.
Before you get to Deathly Hallows Part 2, which is in theory one gigantic climax. But it's certainly action-heavy in the set pieces. There's more going for it, but I like what we said about Order of the Phoenix, that it is very different stylistically. And I do prefer Order of the Phoenix and what it does in terms of story rather than spectacle, which this film relies on a lot more. And there is so much content in this book, but I think because they have to include the Triwizard, a lot of the content is unfortunately sacrificed to spend the time on the games, which is actually the actual title. They have to do it. And obviously it all leads up to Voldemort.
And dare I say as well, I mean, this might be quite controversial to say, I actually think although great and great to watch, I love the Hogwarts stuff and the student interactions with each other so much more interesting than the games themselves. It's great to see the dragon. It's great to see the underwater world with the mermaids and everything. And I think that the maze is actually really effectively done. I would have loved to have seen more of that and build up that atmosphere. But I just love seeing these characters talking to each other and watching it again. I remember not liking it when I first watched it, but as you mentioned, the whole Yule Ball stuff I love, and the comedy is really great there. My favourite moment is where Filch is on the massive gramophone putting the record down, and Minerva's talking about the dance, and she brings Ron Weasley up, and all the, his brothers are joking, and all the students are like wolf whistling him and everything like that. I love that kind of stuff, and I think that if this had been 2 movies, I think you would have got more of that time spent with the minor and side characters. Watching this film again, though, I think my biggest problem, I remember actually being really, really sad when, spoiler alert, Cedric Diggory dies at the end. I felt nothing watching it again, and it wasn't because I knew it was coming up. We just don't spend any time with these other competitors. We talk about Victor Crumb, and I think, doesn't he have like 2 lines of dialogue, or like 20? He says a total of like 20 words in the entire film. Like Fleur Delacroix maybe gets a little bit more with the whole sister dynamic in the second match, and we get to see her in later films briefly as well. But I just don't feel anything for these characters, especially Cedric Diggory, who's meant to be this really prominent character who we're really meant to feel for when he dies at the end. I don't feel anything for it. And, oh God, I'm blanking on the actor's name who played Cedric Diggory.
Patterson.
Robert Pattinson. Hate him in Twilight. Can't stand him in Twilight. I think he's fantastic in this movie. He feels like a completely different person, completely different actor. And there's just not really, you don't really get a sense of his character. You get his dad at the start who's saying like, oh, my upstanding fine boy and everything like that, and I actually think that Cedric Diggory's dad's moment at the end of the film is genuinely heartbreaking, and I love the way that actor plays it. I just wanted to see more of Cedric Diggory throughout the film, and I think it was just a question of running time, because there was so much that this movie had to cram into it. You had to bring in the concept of the Death Eaters, of a Return of Voldemort, of these 3 massive games, of Mad-Eye Moody, the whole Barty Crouch stuff. There was so much in this movie to pack in. However, I think it does neglect the side character element, which is a shame, because when we look at the previous 3 Harry Potter films, some of my favourite characters are the side characters, like Gilderoy Lockhart, or can you count Lupin as like a side character, or Peter Pettigrew, Sirius Black? And I just think that I wish there was more time devoted to them with this movie.
Yeah, I want to kind of backtrack slightly, because you made some really good points. I want to talk very briefly about the first bit, which was the Yule Ball teaching scenes, which is outright one of my favourite moments of the entirety. I love McGonagall. She's one of my favourite characters, and that's one of the most, not necessarily iconic, but one of the funniest moments. And I love the little witty things like that, the English humour, I think we can call it, because it's so British. You wouldn't find that anywhere else. Whereas then if you move on to the Triwizard stuff, you've nailed it, because they don't get any time to develop the side characters. Victor Crumb is very much a brain, not a brain person, but a strength guy, but they don't show that. instead of maybe showing some things, obviously they probably couldn't afford to do the dragon scenes with the other characters, but we don't really see how they've developed. We just see, oh look, this guy did this, she did that, he's done this, oh now it's your turn. That's how it feels like for the challenges.
I don't quite mind about the dragon one though, because I can see from like a film standpoint why they would do that. They don't want to sort of like show their hand right from the off at these dragons. They're saving it for the main character, which is Harry Potter. But I get what you mean, that they are very much sidelined all the time.
They need personalities because each person has them. You're right with Fleur. In the second one, she does get the sister dynamic, and Victor Crumb just likes Hermione. That's it. He just likes her. It's very different on the pages rather than on the screen. Yes, I've nailed getting rid of it in the book. And they speak about how he's always in the library and stuff, so they build him up. He's a really nice guy in it, whereas they just cut all of his dialogue. So it's not necessarily cut, it's just a shame that they couldn't develop him, because he's an interesting character, and he does come back in the 7th book. He's cut out of the film, and there's a deleted scene which hasn't been released of him, which is very important to the Deathly Hallows themselves, which is again a shame they had to cut that out, but I understand why. But you're right, with Cedric's death, when I first saw it, I wasn't emotional, but I was quite sad at the time, and then as I grew older, I think it's because he's not because he's Rob Pattinson, but because he's Twilight.
Yeah,
I was
you
like,
kind of congratulate it. You cheer Voldemort on in that moment.
But every time, I'm so happy you mentioned his dad. That was the first time I ever saw that scene. I didn't cry, but I was close to bawling, and I think that is everything to do with Amos Diggory.
Yeah,
it's so well done.
It's such a real performance, though. Like, his reaction is so genuine in that moment.
I mean, he goes from arrogant father to mourning in about 5 seconds. Yeah, and especially when you have the whole hug with Arthur, runs down and it's, oh, that's my boy, and it's a really well done scene. And I think even we've criticised the editing, but in that scene the editing nails it, where they're cutting between, you know, the kids at Hogwarts, all of their reactions to it, because it's traumatic. I mean, these kids have seen him die, but there's a dead body sitting in front of them.
And wasn't this book, Goblet of Fire, the first one with a major death in it? Because I don't think there was a prominent death in all of them, and it really started with this one, and I think that's where it marked the proper, at least in terms of the books, the proper transition into this darker stuff. And I think from this point onwards, maybe not Half-Blood Prince, but there is a major death in each of the following
Half-Blood
books.
loses someone, a wise old man.
But
what I know what you mean.
Of course, yeah. No,
it's
I completely forgot about that.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Cedric Diggory's death in that moment is shocking because it's just so blunt. And we get, you know, with Mad Eye's class at the start, we get introduced to the 3, what are the curses called? Not forbidden curses.
Unforgivable
curses, that's the one, thank you. We get introduced to those, and we see them in effect in this movie in just such like a heart-stopping way. And I think if we had have had more time with Cedric Diggory, we would have really felt more in that moment. I do think it's slightly saved with Amos Diggory's reaction afterwards, and you're right, the editing, just how that scene is, how they teleport back, all the students and the teachers think everything's fine, the band's playing, everyone's congratulating, and even Harry's just like protecting the body of him, and he's like crying himself. I think that's really effectively done, and I love the ending of this film, how they did that. Do you want to talk more about like sort of Victor Crumb and them, or I think we've really touched on all that stuff, really, haven't we? How they've kind of neglected.
I will say about Durmstrang and Beauxbatons that if you look at each Harry Potter film, the first two, they don't really. The first one introduces the world. The second one keeps you in it, and the expansions begin. We spoke a lot in the last review about Hogsmeade, not necessarily the Dementors, but it starts to expand. You see these other places other than Hogwarts and Diagon Alley. We got Hogsmeade and obviously Azkaban. In this one, we finally are told about other wizarding schools, because there are other wizarding schools. It's not just England. So I kind of love the aspect that it just adds another layer to this world. And from the third film onwards, each time that JK just develops so much more, and credit to the directors who also do it in the film. They can choose to skip bits, but they don't. You know, we'll talk about it much later, but the whole Ministry of Magic in the next one, there's so much which they keep expanding, which is good because they need the levity. They need to stay in Hogwarts, but they've got to do stuff around it to, not difference in repetition, I think is the right words. And by having other schools there, it's a simple but effective device. Because let's face it, if it was a Triwizard tournament at Hogwarts, you would have, I don't know, Malfoy, Harry, Hermione or Ron, and then it would be Cedric. Whereas by having these foreign students, it adds a bit of edge to it, especially with the Karkaroff subplot of a former Death Eater. So they do the whole classic trope, he's the bad guy and he's not all along.
And there's actually a great deleted scene, which obviously I watched in my version, with Karkaroff and Snape. They have an exchange outside of the Yule Ball. There's a great moment where Snape's... there's some students that have gone off for sexual shenanigans in carriages, and Snape's sort of going round and like busting them and like, you know, throwing them out and saying like 10 points from your houses for doing this. It's a great moment, but it does give more setup to the Karkaroff character and the whole Death Eater thing, as well as set up for Snape in the future ones when we learn that he is also a Death Eater too. But you're right about the whole other school things, and I love, if we're talking about sort of like the costume designs, I love the identity they gave them, like the uniforms for the Beauxbaton school as well as Durmstrang. I love that. So I love how they show up to Hogwarts. You know, they've got the flying carriage with like Pegasus for the French school. Durmstrang have got the underwater boat, kind of like Davy Jones, the Flying Dutchman from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies that bursts out of the water. I love all that stuff, and I love, I'm going to try and pronounce this. Is it Frances Delatour as Madame Maxine? I thought she was great in this role, and I love her dynamic with Hagrid. Hagrid gets slightly less to do in this film, and that's kind of a trope that goes all the way through the films from this point onwards, I would say. But I do love, and we go back to that humour, I do love that Madame Maxine was a prominent character in this film in terms of that dynamic with Hagrid, because that's a great bit in the book as well.
Yeah, and it leads to some funny moments. It's not in your face funny, but it's the unintentional British humour of just the way Hagrid looks up at her when he combs his hair, and it adds a bit of layer to Hagrid. And it's a shame because each film, you're right, they do kind of cut him from, arguably from the second one onwards. He's got a fair bit in the third because of Buckbeak, but it's the subplots they have with him. I like them, but they're so easy to delete because they're not necessarily needed. And it's a shame that you've got such a major character that unfortunately falls flat with the next 3 films. And he's not even in Deathly Hallows Part 2 bar one scene.
Yeah, no.
I think just that 1 or 2 scenes, but again, that's just because they had to cut things, and that comes down to the timing and the detail we get in the book. And it's a shame, but I think with Hagrid, we got him in the first few films as well as he did, and he's got a very powerful moment in the 5th one, I think.
Yeah, no, Hagrid's only in 2 scenes in Deathly Hallows Part 2, which is a shame because going back to Chamber of Secrets, there is no Hogwarts without you, Hagrid, and I think that he was kind of the heart of the film, especially the first couple, and it's a shame that he kind of got sidelined, but, you know, the plot moves on in different ways and certain characters get more of a focus than others, so I completely understand it, especially for the movies. But if we're talking about new characters that get introduced to this as well, Mad-Eye Moody, played by Brendan Gleeson. His son will later feature in the series as well as Bill Weasley. I love Mad-Eye in this movie. The way he plays it, his mannerisms, just and how physical he is with the character. Like how he has that really exaggerated limp to him. And he even brings in elements of David Tennant's performance as well. Now, I don't know if the two ever... I'm guessing they must have spoke to each other on set to sort of like bring in elements of each other's performance, or maybe that was just down to the director saying play it more like this. But when he's swigging, what we later find is the Polyjuice potion, and he's doing like the whole crazy Heath Ledger Joker tongue thing. He's great to watch. I even love his lessons as well, and you can go into your favourite bit with Mad-Eye. It's one of my favourite bits too. You said it's much earlier in the book than it is in the film, but he balances it so well between being sinister and intimidating but having that comedy to him.
Yeah, and even the lesson, I forgot to mention earlier, when you're speaking about you love the Hogwarts bits with them as characters, in the later films we kind of leave the lessons. So we always get a bit of defence against the Dark Arts, which we do in this with the introduction of the curses. But they're great fun, and you do miss that school bit, but the scene with Draco is hilarious. And again, it's the dynamic between Brendan Gleeson and...
Tom Felton.
No, not just Tom Felton. Oh, no. Although he does come into it, I was thinking more of Professor McGonagall.
Yeah,
because
I was going to say, this is like, I think this is only Draco's only scene in this film, isn't it? He's really not in it a lot.
This is the parts where he's hardly in the 4th book, he's hardly in the 3rd. I'm happy that he's got a lot of stuff to do in the later films. Even Tom Felton said that. So they do take him on a path, but you can only be the school bully for so long.
Yeah.
And what they do with him is great, especially when you get the lines, you know, I'd tell you stories about your father that would make your hair curl, I think.
Yeah.
But he's just got these great moments, and He's this crazy bloke. He's got the magical eye, which is, I love just watching it on the screen dart around. He's a great character, and I'm happy he come back in the later films, albeit a lot shorter scenes.
Yeah.
But I think they nailed it. And casting wise, I could not think of anyone different to have played him. I mean, you mentioned some of the names that they'd spoken about before. Was it I forgot his name, Billy Connolly?
Yeah, Billy Connolly, and oh god, who was the other person we said?
Someone that wouldn't have been good enough, basically, in a non-nasty way.
Yeah, I'm gonna check that up if you want to keep talking about him. You really like the ferret scene, don't you? I think that was this. You said the favourite scene.
The ferret scene's great because he's, it's the whole Potter stinks badges. My father's got a bet that you'll last 3 minutes. It's like, I think you'll last 30 seconds. Then Mad Eye just comes out and just obliterates him. But it's just the little funny things of Crabbe and Goyle, everyone laughing. Then McGonagall comes out, is like, "What are you doing?" He's there like, "Technically, I'm teaching."
Yeah,
and he just
like, transfiguration is forbidden as a punishment at Hogwarts, coming from the transfiguration teacher herself.
And he just doesn't care. But that's what I love about him, because he's built up as the crazy psychopath. Ron kind of says, he's a nutter. He's got his Polyjuice potion, which everyone thinks is alcohol, obviously, for the duration of it, in his pocket. And he's just this incredible nutcase, and I just love seeing him on screen. I would love to see more of him, and again, that's credit each dark. We've said that for the last 3 Dark Arts teachers in a row.
Yeah, and I just checked the other actor. It was Ray Winston was the other actor considered alongside Billy Connolly for the role of Mad-Eye Moody. Watching the film again, though, I will say that that something's up with him instantly. The twist doesn't come as much of a shock. I don't know if I think it would probably be more effective in the book because, you could really subtly hint to it, and there's no really easy way to do that in terms of the movie. But you can tell just from how, jittery he is from the very start of the movie that there is something up with his character, and it's not all down to him just being mad. One of my least favourite aspects about this movie, actually, which is really shocking coming from me who's a fan of his work, is David Tennant. I really don't like some of the performances in this movie, and it's really him who does this really over-the-top. Karkaroff's another one. I think the actor who played him really went over the top with the character. David Tennant in this movie is just ridiculous to the point where he's comedic. I think he's meant to be really intimidating, for example. And he's just... Well, this was before Dark Knight, but he is kind of... That's the best way I can describe it, is doing the Heath Ledger Joker thing. He's really manic. He sort of barks like a crazed dog. And I don't know if that's the character from the book or not, but I think if he'd have gone for a much more subtle and villainous role for this part, I think that would have worked a lot better for it. And also, when it comes as a twist at the end of it, turns out that David Tennant has used the Polyjuice potion to disguise himself as Mad-Eye Moody, and the real Mad-Eye is locked away in the chest. It doesn't come as much of a shock because there's moments where, even at the Yule Ball, you see sort of Mad-Eye Moody dancing along to the music and singing along to it, and it's like, would David Tennant's character really do that? Would he act like that? There's the only great moment is where he's using the Cruciatus curse. He's getting Neville to do it, which is the curse that they used on Neville's parents, which sent them mad, which I thought was a really, really effective moment. It's such a shame that they never really fully developed the whole Longbottom craze thing, or when they were tortured. I think it's hinted at in Order of the Phoenix when Sirius gives him that picture and he talks about them there, but really beyond that we don't get any more of that. This was the first part where it was started to build that history in terms of the Death Eaters and what they actually did to characters we've known and cared about for all this time.
And I like what it does with the Neville stuff, because we haven't really seen much of him develop. He's always been the bumbling idiot, why always me? And then you get this moment where he raises his hand, and that's the shock, that he raised his hand in a lesson. And then you learn, he does know the curse is hurting him. There's a great moment of Hermione. Then you kind of sympathise with him that Mad-Eye, takes him aside, gives him some books and stuff. It makes him so much more sinister because he did take part in torturing his parents, and that's why he does go to Azkaban. We learn that in the Pensieve, that he was responsible for torturing them, which makes him even more twisted as a villain. But as you mentioned with some of the sort of Dark Knight Ledger stuff, I do think he's very over the top, and he's very different to what he is in the books. Oh no, I said it again. Because he's like an 18-year-old kid who gets put in Azkaban by his dad, and he's scared, afraid, everything like that. And then he is this then eventual villain badass. There's a backstory which is cut, which made sense because of time. Whereas in this, he's, hello father, and psychopathic licking of the lips and all this stuff, which is a great flashback scene. But with the David Tennant stuff, it's just, to me, so weird seeing the Doctor as this villain, and there's so many Doctor Who Easter eggs in this, which is unintentional because obviously this was filmed in 2004 and he was announced as the Doctor in 2005. Ironically enough, his first performance as the Doctor came in a Children Need special, which was on the same day that this film was released at cinemas, which is a coincidence. And if you didn't think that was weird enough, in the season 2 finale is called Parting of the Ways in Doctor Who. The chapter in which he's discovered as being the villain in this is called Parting of the Ways. So, and again, let's go for round 3. Barty Crouch Sr. creates the Cybermen in Doctor Who. Barty Crouch Jr. is Doctor Who.
Yeah.
So it's so unintentional, but I love it for some reason. It's really bizarre, and you wouldn't connect Doctor Who to Harry Potter, but I always do with this film. But it's just hard to see him being anyone else than the Doctor, even though he is incredible in Jessica Jones. And
he's brilliant in that. He's the best thing about that show.
The first time I didn't see him as the Doctor, which is one hell of an achievement. Watch it if you haven't already. But I like where they take him in this, and it's over the top and a bit different to what I'd expect him to be. But it adds so much more levity to it, especially when you get the little Neville stuff, which unfortunately they can't explore.
Yeah, and the thing is with David Tennant is, I don't know if this is because it came out before he was Doctor Who. Not many people sort of remember that he was in this, or not many people talk about his character, and I don't think that's because the character didn't have much impact or whatnot. I don't know if they could have saved the talent of David Tennant, because he is a fantastic actor, and applied him to a different character later on down the line. But that being said, I don't know who else he could have played. He's a very versatile actor. He could play many different sort of like personalities of characters, but I don't see. He did feel a bit wasted on this character, if I'm going to be honest. And as I said, I don't know if that's because it was before Doctor Who, before he was a major name and he was sort of doing like little projects here and there. I don't know, but anyway, we should move on to some other new characters anyway. One of my favourites, and I really, really wish she'd have got more screen time in this movie, is Rita Skeeter, played by the brilliant Miranda Richardson. Now, I want to give myself a little pat on the back for this, and this is sort of going back into my memories of Goblet of Fire. So, I'd read the book, instantly loved the character of Rita Skeeter, and I was trying to think of actors they could get to play it, and you're thinking about British talent who they hadn't used in the movies before. And I'm a big fan of Blackadder. She plays Queen Elizabeth I in that. She's hilarious. She's a fantastic actress. And I immediately said Miranda Richardson would be perfect for the role of Rita Skeeter. Casting comes out. She's been cast as Rita Skeeter. And I thought that was kind of awesome. And I literally can't think of a better actress they could have got to play her. And the scenes that we get, albeit not very many, she is that character. She is totally perfect in that performance. And I do think she gets a lot more to do in the book, and I think she might come up later on. I think she's referenced in, is it Order of the Phoenix? Or one of those where you see an article come out, or a paper with an article written by Rita Skeeter, so that was a nice bit of continuity with that.
Yeah, so with Rita Skeeter, she's got scenes in the 5th book, which are cut, and she does the whole Dumbledore book in the 7th in Deathly Hallows. That's the one, yeah. So it's kind of nice that she's mentioned a lot more, but I don't think it's as clear in the films as it is in the books that she's still about. And she's got a massive subplot with Hagrid and other characters, which they kind of skip over, but when she's on screen, she's great, and she doesn't necessarily steal the scenes, but she adds this kind of extra layer to it. The first time you get to meet the paper people, which become very important as the later films go on with the propaganda war and stuff. So it's a really well done introduction necessarily to that aspect of the Wizarding world. But she's so welcome in each scene. She's this sleazeball, you can't stand her, but then you kind of love her at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, she's playing like a very stereotypical journalist, isn't she? She kind of like badgers people. She makes fake articles. She'll take a picture or a sentence out of context, and like even all her dialogue is pretty much she's spewing ideas and brainstorms for different slogans and different what's the word I'm looking for? Like tabloids for the paper. That's not the right word I'm looking for. Headlines? That's the one. And she just plays it fantastically. It is kind of weird though when you watch it again, and she's being very flirty with Harry Potter himself and a lot of the other characters, and then you go, well, hang on a minute, in terms of the context of this series, he's meant to be 14. And there is the kind of that funny running joke where she keeps calling him 12 and he keeps correcting her with 14. The article comes out anyway and she still credits him as 12. But no, Miranda Richardson was great. She's one of my favourite additions to this film. As I said, although she doesn't have many scenes in it, But I think we need to move on to sort of like the biggest introduction in this movie, towards the end of it. And this is our big evil villain, the Dark Lord, which carries over into all the other films. Ralph Fiennes as Voldemort. Now, we have a lot of thoughts on Voldemort, and I'm sure we'll talk much more about him when we get to Deathly Hallows Part 2. Nevertheless, this is his big sort of reimagining, rebirth. What do you think of Ralph Fiennes as Voldemort? I'm going to pass it to you first.
I absolutely love him.
Yeah.
He is this ball of energy that's so welcome and so unexpected to Voldemort. The second you're introduced to him, he's giving his speech to Wormtail, he's finally back. He's not wearing any shoes, and he's just gliding across the grass.
He's so graceful with his movements in
this. He is. He almost dances in his robes, and I love seeing him on screen. And then he has all of his monologues about being able to touch Harry. It's very inappropriate.
His weird noises he makes.
Yes, and it's a sign of everything to come. And every time he comes on screen, he steals it in every film.
He does.
Even when he's dueling, the faces he pulls, his hand actions, his screaming. I love seeing him in these films, and it's such a welcome addition because they could have took the route of this really evil, intimidating man, which I still think he is to some degree. When he's evil, he's pure evil.
I think you see signs of that in Deathly Hallows Part 1.
Yeah.
Where he kills the teacher. That's where you really get the sense of intimidating Voldemort, which kind of goes back to how he was in the first movie. But I think his sort of like eccentric moments kind of outweigh his intimidating ones a little bit.
And I love their moments because I think if you take them away, he's so two-dimensional as a villain.
Yeah.
Bad man, killed family. Whereas in this, it's this whole levity of his soft-talking voice, the snake-like face, which they finally corrected and gave him nostrils for not nose, but nostrils that slits. He hasn't got a nose. Gone. Magic.
I think in the book it's described he's got red eyes and a nose like a snake. Well, he has no nose.
Yeah, he's just got slits for nose, they say in the books. And the red eyes, which they don't really follow, but kind of do-ish in some aspects of it. But you've waited for him and he delivers.
Yeah.
Although the one thing I can't get over is they always say Voldemort killed Cedric, but Wormtail did. Obviously he's under orders, but I just can't ever get over that for some reason.
I do love that moment though where he's like, kill the spare, and then he's just instantly just killed there.
And he like backflips across the graveyard. The graveyard of his parents, to be precise, which isn't explored in the film again.
Yeah.
But I like seeing him, and as a duel goes, he's almost taking the piss. He's got his crew back. He's absolutely buzzing. And then he doesn't get to kill Harry, which sets up the future ones very well. But it gives you a sign of what's to come. The threat's there, and it's now about building that and building up to the massive finale.
And I mean, you know, I will always stand up for the Voldemort in the first movie. It was the first time I saw him. I love his voice. Richard Bremner played him. Richard Bremer. I love the Voldemort in the first movie. I know a lot of people don't. I'm not too caught up with the appearance. Like, everyone says that, oh, he should have the snake nose. That really never bothered me. I kind of liked how he looked in that first movie. I think the effects are still okay on that, but this is Voldemort in person now. Now, I will say I'm not too keen on the design, and I don't know if it's through Ralph Fiennes' performance of being really over the top and hilarious, which kind of take his intimidating appearance away, but he was never a villain I was scared of. Now, there's a moment when he's it's a great shot though in the movie where, you know, he's morphing into Voldemort and he's kind of like holding his face and like writhing his head around, and then he opens his eyes and it's the Ralph Fiennes Voldemort we know. If they'd have kept the design for the character like as soon as you see that shot where his ears haven't formed and his whole head looks very alien and snake-like, I think that would have been really cool, and kept like the dead eyes on him. But that being said, you're right, and it's that balancing act where if they had have gone all out serious, I think you would have lost a lot of the element of the character, and it would have been very boring and very dour, especially when we get to the last films where really our only sense of enjoyment and fun comes from his performance. Although it would be nice to have a villain you're genuinely scared of and intimidated of all the way through, and I never really get that with Ralph Fiennes Voldemort. I did with the first Voldemort. Maybe that was because I was a kid and I was kind of scared of it at the time. That being said, Ralph Fiennes is a fine actor. and he looks like he's having so much fun playing Voldemort in this. And we've talked about this loads with villains in films. Really, there's only other one villain that I can kind of hold up alongside Voldemort, and that's Emperor Palpatine, in terms of how over the top and hilarious and how much we love them. Every time they're on screen, they just light up the screen and we're just completely there with them. And you're right, like his movements in this, he just looks so happy to be alive again. He's just like, he's like an ice skater. He's like a figure skater, just like twirling around. The way he says certain lines when he does the Crucio curse, he does it like in a very flamboyant, over the top way. He's great, and I do love him. And you're right, in this movie, it is the one where you get a lot of his facial expressions and weird grunting sound effects, but it's all part of the character. And I think he developed the character really well all the way through to the end. It's just that I don't think he does have that intimidating quality to him. And I think with Voldemort, how much he's been bigged up all the way through the series to this point, I think it would have been nice to have had that, although I understand why he didn't do that. There are some aspects to the character, mostly in Deathly Hallows Part 2, which we'll get to eventually in our review for it, which I do question some of his delivery and why he thought that was villainous or a good idea. But out of all the actors, it just looks like he's having the most fun with it.
And I think it's important, not necessarily to have fun, but in the whole villainous stride, you need to make a lasting impression. I think that's what Ralph Fiennes does, because he said he saw the first two films, he didn't like them, but he was drawn to it, whether that was the money, whether that was Mike Newell or J.K. Rowling or David Heyman, we'll never know. But he brought something to the role which I don't think many other people could. I mean, you go watch a film like Schindler's List, where he is absolutely horrific, and you see Voldemort in him. I mean, it's perfect casting. And then you get to this, and I think the way he's so eccentric is because as the character, he's got Harry. He's alive for the first time and walking about for the first time in 13 years. He's not on the back of someone's head or a goal or a baby. And now he's finally got himself Harry. He's going to kill him. He's going to bring havoc back to the Wizarding World. That's why he's taking the piss. He makes him bow and stuff like that. And then he doesn't get his way. And you see the flashes of him getting angry when he's shouting no, but they really develop in the later films. But I just love the whole build-up of him destroying all the Death Eaters for not coming back to save him. Slagging off Wormtail, who did save him. He's got the nastiness in him, and he does have an on-screen presence.
And talking about Wormtail, he has that great moment where, you know, Wormtail's had to cut off his own hand as part of the incantation to bring Voldemort back. And Voldemort's like first words are like, "Hold out your arm, Wormtail," thinking that he's going to regenerate his arm, and then he's just like, the other arm, and summons all his guys. And then, he does eventually give him his hand back, but he makes him wait for it, which I like about the character.
Yeah, it's funny, because all he does care about is getting the Death Eaters back with the badass Dark Mark tattoo.
Yeah, and I know you didn't really want to talk about it all that much in this one, but it being the first appearance of the Death Eaters, we'll come back to these guys much more in the next review with Order of the Phoenix, but their appearance in this is downright laughable. I really question the design of these. I think that, I don't know if it was like a Russian production thing, or because I can't believe someone okayed the look of these guys. The masks aren't too bad, and I like the whole aspect of how it's like a magical mask, how they pull it away. It looks a lot better in Order of the Phoenix though, but the whole hood thing, they do look like they're members of some kind of clan, or like the KKK or something. And I don't think it works for the character. I think they really nailed the design in Order of the Phoenix onwards.
Yeah, they're just so stupid. I mean, the black pointy hats, I mean, could you be any more obvious that you're a Trump supporter? It's just one of those it's just one of those things where, not the books, I'm just trying to avoid saying not the books again. All it says is like school masks, which they do well. They do have school masks, but they don't have anything about pointy hats, and they use it, and I'm so happy they got rid of it, because it looked too obvious, a bit too stupid, especially when you get 10, 15 of them walking around together.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously in the later ones you see them flying around a bit more. Their masks actually look intimidating and awesome at the same time, not stupid from a Halloween store.
I was going to say, can you imagine these guys in Order of the Phoenix when they're having that fight towards the end?
Yeah,
you've just been laughing at the screen.
They just look like absolute idiots. I mean, yeah. I get why they did it, because there are comparisons between Trump and the Hitler and Voldemort and stuff. But it's just one of those where they didn't think it through, and it does seem like a rush job, you're right.
But not much else to talk about on this one. I think we need to talk about the music because we talk about departures with this movie. A massive one. John Williams didn't come back to do the music for this one, which is understandable because he would have loved to. His schedule for that year was absolutely insane. I've got his schedule up here. For 2005, he had Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, Memoirs of a Geisha, Munich, and the Steven Spielberg remake of War of the Worlds as well. There's only so much this guy can do, and I think he had a lot on his schedule when he came to do Chamber of Secrets as well. We talk about that he had to have someone help him construct that score and utilise his old themes from Philosopher's Stone in that one. And it is a real shame because it was nice to have that musical continuity between the films. I know that Azkaban didn't really use as many of the themes from the first two. Nevertheless, the score to Azkaban, although I don't like it as much as the previous two, is still a phenomenal score, and I don't really think any of the scores following this hit the heights of John Williams. The later few films are phenomenal soundtracks, and I actually think that Patrick Doyle, who did the music to this movie, Goblet of Fire, it is a very, it's a very good score. It completely fits the movie. There's only one theme I hate in it, and that's Voldemort's new theme. I love the John Williams. I think it's called The Face of Voldemort, and there's a lot of variations on it throughout the two soundtracks. Was an iconic theme to Voldemort. You had the Harry Potter theme, you had a lot of other themes as well, but Voldemort's theme, it always played in those really sort of foreboding, eerie moments, and it didn't always usually play when Voldemort was there. It played like during the Chamber of Secrets, it played during talks of the Philosopher's Stone. It was played when there was ever a moment where a moment of intrigue came up, which then culminated into the big bombastic Voldemort theme. And I would have loved to have heard it in this movie, especially in the scene where Voldemort does opens his eyes and we fully get the reveal of him. The Voldemort theme in this really doesn't work. It's not very memorable. However, the rest of the music, listening to it again, although I couldn't sing to you any music from it or remember any of it now, when you watch the movie, it is very beautiful music, and I sat through all the credits to these films and just listening to the music, it's really, really great. Departure as well, we do get like a rock band in this movie as well, which it's kind of jarring when you first listen to it. It doesn't really fit with the rest of the tone that's been established with Harry Potter, but I guess it kind of works for that kind of prom style Yule Ball, teenager kind of thing.
Yeah, because you get the stuff like Potter Waltz, which is the great Yule Ball song, and then you get the pop music. But at least it's wizard pop music. I think the song is called "Can You Dance Like a Hippogriff" or something like that. Yeah. So it's very on the cheek, and there is deleted scenes if you guys want to listen to the whole music video, with the very odd Professor Flitwick being crowd surfed. But it is right because it's Williams' first one, and I love the way the film opens. I mean, it doesn't open with Hedwig's theme I think the only one that doesn't actually. It
does. It opens with
does it?
Like a darker, foreboding minor tune to the soundtrack.
Because I was going to say it opens so dark. It's got the first one. You get the black clouds. It starts obviously with Voldemort, not with Harry, which is why I think they altered it. Because if it started with Harry, you would have had the very traditional recreation of Hedwig's theme.
Well, I was going to say, this is the first movie, I think it's the only one in the series, that doesn't open with the Dursleys. They're not in this movie at all.
Half-Blood, it doesn't just... But again, it's just stuff they cut for time, which is a shame, because they in theory, they're in every single book, but then they make it into the film, which is a massive shame, because they've got this brilliant on-screen chemistry and charisma, which I want to see more of. But the music, I do like the soundtrack, but it's what you said earlier, when you don't think of this film, like you don't think of this film soundtrack, but when you're listening, you remember it all. It's very much so. I mean, the Victor Crumb theme, I call it, because what it seems like the Belgian national anthem is just them chanting his surname.
The drums when they enter the Great Hall is fantastic, when they do that whole kind of like staff routine. And
I like a lot of what they do with it. Even the little bits of Beauxbatons, how they're so differentiated from Hogwarts, but then obviously it changes. I don't think it's very different to John Williams essentially. I don't think Williams, obviously he was an outstanding score, but you wouldn't have seen such differential changes in the styles of music each score had. It might have been someone else's idea, but I don't think it would have been like that. But again, I can't compare Williams to Patrick Doyle because very different styles of composing, and he only stayed around for one film. I talk a lot more about the Order of the Phoenix one because I do love that when we get to it. But that's when I thought they were looking for a long-term composer.
Yeah, and I know we're over an hour now. I've just thought of another section I'd like to bring up with this movie because I think it's a big part of it that definitely carries on through to, I would say, Half-Blood Prince. It definitely introduces that concept of like relationships and everything like that. We have Harry chasing after Cho Chang in this movie. The whole element of romance is definitely surrounded by the Yule Ball. And I love all that stuff in it. And I did say with Half-Blood Prince that I think it gets away of the plot a little bit. Having watched it again, I think it's necessary, especially setting up for all those relationships for Deathly Hallows. But it's kind of going back to what I said. I think it was with Chamber of Secrets where I said when I went to the cinema I noticed their voices had changed a little bit, and it was the characters going into puberty, and as you watching it as a kid you're kind of picking up on this and realising the characters change. In 3, when they're in their own clothes, you notice it even more, and with this one with more of the relationship stuff, you definitely get that also. I would say this is really the point where the characters are growing up and moving into adolescence, and it's kind of a nice element to see. It doesn't bog the film down, and I think it's done in a very sort of like nice, innocent way that you can connect with yourself as a viewer and sort of laugh at and go along with it. And I really like that element. I just remembered it now. I thought it was worth bringing up because I think it is a big part of the movie itself.
Yeah, and it's following real life. It does happen at that age. Relationships happen. It builds up well, and it's a necessary introduction. I think the Yule Ball is perfectly designed to help further that. I mean, in Azkaban, you could argue get the first hints of Ron and Hermione when they very briefly hold hands, but the whole jealousy angle of Victor Crumb, Ron's hero, comes into this one. And it makes some funny scenes because they are kids, they're trying to dance and they can't do it, so it's this important introduction, especially as you get to the latter films. But you're right, Half-Blood Prince is the main one for that. But you do get the sort of the foundations of Harry and Cho Chang, especially with a not obvious love triangle with Cedric Diggory, which doesn't really lead to much.
No, it's just kind of done for that awkward jealousy moment, isn't it, between the characters, really, in terms of the relationship. But yeah, it kind of does cement Hermione and Ron together in this movie, or definitely shows that attraction. I think even if you go back to like the first movie, there are elements there in place already, which I picked up on more when I rewatched the movies again. I think it's where she runs up and instantly hugs Harry and then goes to with Ron, but then there's that awkward handshake. I think actually that might be in Chamber of Secrets when she's cured of being petrified. So they even set it up with that one, which I like, and then it sort of culminates in this one. A bit of trivia about the scene with Emma Watson where she's in like the beautiful pink dress, and there's that whole, I think it's credited as like the Cinderella moment. Apparently she fell down the stairs during one of the takes of that, which is kind of hilarious, and I really wish that was on the outtakes. I hope she didn't hurt herself too much because that looked like a long stone stairway down there. So but that's pretty funny. I guess we can just move on to favourite scenes then, although we've kind of talked a lot about my favourite ones already. If you've got any other ones to add, then we'll sort of do those and then round off.
I think I spoke about my main ones. I mean, the film's got its moments, certainly, with the Voldemort stuff, but it's the two Mad-Eye ones, one with Malfoy and the other one with the Unforgivable Curses. They're such brilliant moments, and they're so different. They're not big, massive set pieces. They're very small. And there's a lot I do like, but to me they stand out the most. I do like most of this film, but they're character moments, and sometimes they can outweigh the spectacle. Yeah.
For me, we've kind of said them all. I love everything with Voldemort in it at the graveyard scene. I think that's brilliantly handled, and we get the first proper official duel between Voldemort and Harry themselves, and that kind of imagery of the green light coming from Voldemort's wand, which actually I own. My dad bought me that wand. It didn't come in the box or anything, but I have Voldemort's wand from this movie, which is pretty cool. Very, very awesome design on it. It looks almost like a bone off of like an animal or something with like a velociraptor claw at the bottom. It's awesome. And like Harry's beam with the red one, that's a motif that carries on through all the other films, definitely culminates in the last movie. I love the Amos Diggory scene where he realises his son's died and he's just kind of breaks down. I think that's brilliantly handled, and I actually really like the ending scene as well. I can't remember if it's in this one. Is this the one where Emma Watson says something like everything's going to change now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, this one.
It's either this one or Order of the Phoenix. I can't remember. It might be this one. And then they sort of look out and you see the Pegasus carriage going into the sky, flying back, and the Durmstrang boat going back under the water. It's a really, really nice ending scene. So yeah, there are some really nice moments in this. There are some very stupid ones. I think that although they actually built a tank, I can't remember how many gallons of water it filled for the second challenge under the water, which is really impressive that they did that. I know that Daniel Radcliffe racked up loads and loads of hours in that tank. I think that when he has to rescue his friends, the dummies that they use for the friends aren't very convincing, and they do kind of look like dummies in there. That kind of takes me out of the moment. But I just like that we see a lot more of Hogwarts, and we get to see these games, and it introduces a lot of elements that do carry on throughout the franchise, kind of like how Azkaban did as well. If I'm going to do recommendation though, I mean, absolutely I would still recommend this movie. There's a lot of great stuff in there. If you're watching the series, you clearly got to see it because it sets up so much. If I'm going to rank the films, I think that'll be easier to do once we get to Harry Potter Deathly Hallows Part 2, and we can kind of go back through the series and see which one's our favourite. I'm not sure if this is my least favourite of the series, because I think that's a very, very harsh title to put on one of these movies. However, we talked about the structure of it, and I do think it takes a while for it to find its footing, and I do think that it would have benefited from adding more elements in from the book to kind of flesh stuff out. The direction feels slightly off in it, that doesn't really marry up with the tone of any of the other ones. And then I think the franchise sort of like found its home with David Yates, with Order of the Phoenix onwards. So for now, I will say this is my least favourite one, but there is still a lot of elements in this movie that I love.
Yeah, it's such a harsh tag because I think it's similar to mine, that or maybe the third one. Not so what? Whoa, not third. Sorry, the second.
Oh, whoa,
one.
That's your favourite one, yeah.
I love them all. It's so sad to say I've got a worse film because I genuinely love all 8 of these films, and I don't dislike any of them. And it's just sad seeing one at the bottom of the list because one has to go there. It's like that. It's like the whole. What's the highest grossing Harry Potter film? The lowest grossing Prisoner of Azkaban, but to me that's my favourite. Whereas some people, the lowest critically is Deathly Hallows Part 1, I think.
Yeah, I know a lot of people criticise that for being slow.
But that's such, again, a different film, so it's just one of them, but unfortunately one of the films has to be last in their own schedule list. And it's the same every great franchise.
Yeah, I will completely agree with that, absolutely. But yeah, I think we pretty much said everything we can on Goblet of Fire. Gone on quite a lot longer than I think we both expected on this one. We both didn't know we'd have a lot to say about this, but apparently we did. But that'll do it for our review on Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of this movie, the book, the rest of the franchise, anything to do with Harry Potter. Please do drop a comment because we'd like to have a conversation and get some Potter fans in here. Or even if you're not a Potter fan, let us know what you don't like about the movie. Our next review will be Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. However, we will have a video in between those two. I guess we can give it away now. It will be top 10 Harry Potter moments, which, George, you're going to do with one of your mates. I'll be giving my 5 picks as well to you, which you can read out into that. But I'm interested to watch that and see what you guys pick for your best moment, because there are so many in Harry Potter. I was even getting it down to 5 picks for my own list is proving a really, really tough task after watching all these 8 movies again. But we'll have that, and then that will sort of take us through the rest of the month where we do reviews on all the rest of the movies, and we'll have a very special Battle of the Brackets as well to round off Harry Potter month, as well as our review, of course, on Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which I believe comes out next week, isn't it? Or is it the following
November
week?
the 18th, so this week.
2 weeks' time, isn't it?
Next week.
Is it next week?
Yeah, next week.
Yeah, it will be, yes. Okay, so we'll have that next week. That'll be a live stream. But yeah, so please do hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to keep updated with all of our content. And until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.
Mischief managed.